Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, we have a catch-up conversation. We are catching up with a previous guest and finding out what has been happening in their life since we first had them on the podcast. Today, joining us from Tennessee, we have Wendy Smith from Odd Man Inn. Wendy is the co-founder and executive director of Odd Man Inn Animal Refuge. Welcome back, Wendy.
Thank you, Fred. I'm thrilled to be here today. Thanks for inviting me for a second trip.
Yeah, this is great. I'm excited to chat. Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. Before we get into your latest adventures, can you just remind our listeners of your vegan journey and how you became vegan?
Gosh, I remember last time we talked about this, and I told the story of like when I was a kid and how I always was an animal lover. I was the kind of kid that, I'm a natural empath. I wanted like all of my stuffed animals to be lined up on the bed in perfect alignment. And I wanted to make sure even the dirty, missing eyeball ones still had a chance to be on the front of the pile. I was like an animal activist out of the womb. And as an adult, I didn't really know how that translated into adult things, right? I didn't have stuffed animals anymore. And I wasn't sure what that looked like when you were an adult. Like I wanted a dog or I wanted a cat, but that still didn't feel like the perfect, representation of what it meant to be an animal lover. And then I met Josh, my husband, my partner, also the co-founder of Odd Man Inn. And Josh had already been vegan for something like 12 years by the time I met him. And he had to explain what vegan meant to me from the ground up. I'm embarrassed to say I was a woman in my early 30s and I didn't really understand the world of animal agriculture or where our food came from. And once he sort of pulled back the curtain and said, well, this is why I'm vegan, and these are the things that I find unacceptable in our world, I was like, oh, I get it. I understand. Now, as an adult, you show that you are an animal lover by not hurting them. It feels so foolish to look back and realize I had not connected the dots. But I really do think that is a similar story that a lot of people share, where the marketing of animal agriculture is so vicious. I don't even know another word to say, right? It's so vicious and it's so savvy that most of us spend our entire lives not understanding what it means to actually be an animal lover and what it actually means to live a life where you do not hurt animals.
That's true. I feel that the animal agriculture and those companies have kind of tricked us into being naive of what's actually happening.
So true. That the word naive is perfect, right? Where people just think they understand how the world works. You think like, okay, like I've gone to college and I'm a business professional and I worked in healthcare. I've been a nurse for 25 years. You would think that a nurse would understand that. And it's shocking that I went through nutrition classes in college and still didn't understand the damage that animal agriculture is doing. And I really think the bottom line is like people are just really indoctrinated at a young age to believe that either we are entitled or it is normal to hurt animals in order to feed ourselves. And the reality is I've been vegan now for almost 10 years and I'm feeding myself just fine without hurting animals.
Right. Now that we've caught everybody up on your vegan story, let's talk Odd Man Inn. When we when we spoke last, you and Josh were in Washington State, and now you're in Tennessee. What happened?
Well, I do remember when we spoke last, we had this little like off-camera moment where I said, I have something in the works, but I can't talk about it yet. So please don't ask me any questions about this. So Fred, you were one of the very first people to even know that we were planning to move to Tennessee. You knew before it was ever public. And so what happened was we purchased a piece of property here in Fentress County, Tennessee. It's 93 acres, and it is the former home of a sanctuary that had 159 pigs in their care. And the sanctuary dissolved. The animals were surrendered to Odd Man Inn. And overnight, it was on funny, it was April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2021. We assumed care of the property and the animals. And for the next year, we ran two sanctuaries on practically opposite sides of the country from each other while we moved our entire sanctuary and all of the animals from Washington to Tennessee. And it was a 2,700-mile road trip, which we did back and forth, round trip, a total of 11 times to ensure that all of the Washington animals were safely transported into the Tennessee property. So we are now all under one roof in Tennessee. We have a total of 179 pig residents, almost 200 total animal residents. And and it's a lot, dude. It's a lot.
Oh, I bet it's a lot. 200 animals? That's 200 quite animals, a few.
Yes. And I mean, and it's 179 pigs, but a majority of them, probably 60 to 70% of the pigs are large breed pigs. We're talking big guys, right? 600 pounds and up. Our biggest pig is just under 1,000 pounds.
Wow.
And they're beautiful. They're a lot of work, but my gosh, they are beautiful. It is such a joy to be here taking care of them. And I feel like I could die a happy woman tomorrow, knowing that these animals are getting all of the things that they need because of us arriving here. I'm really, really proud of the work that we have done here, but also the support that we have had, the outpouring of support that we have had from our community and our followers and our fans. It absolutely was not possible without the support of those people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, a lot of times people forget, right, that it costs money, and you're moving all the way across the country. Mm-hmm. All these animals, what'd you say, 11 times? You had to go across the country?
11 round trips.
That's insane. I mean, that is pretty far.
I did have one. We have one friend who I don't think she meant this rudely, but she did say, I started following Odd Man Inn when you guys said you were moving across the country because I just had to see, like, how is this even possible? Like, she just needed to watch the train wreck unfold. And and she said, and I couldn't believe it when you were actually doing it. It was actually happening. When I heard you were moving that far with that many animals, I was like, this I got to see. So it was a lot of very hard work. We certainly did not do it by ourselves. We had a mountain of helpers, both in Washington and in Tennessee, that helped us run the place and helped us sort of, keep the train on the tracks while we moved ourselves back and forth. And it does definitely feel like a relief to be, we're now 30 months into this. We've been doing this for not quite 2.5 years. And it feels like a huge relief to have that off of our plate, the move off of our plate, but also when we got here, there were over 60 females that were unspayed, 60 female pigs left unspayed. And it is scientifically proven that female pigs need to be spayed for their long-term health. It's not just about their ability to have babies. It is actually long-term. It has long-term benefits for their health and keeps them living a long life. And so when we got here and we realized that there were so many females unspayed, we started down this mission of okay, well, we're going to get the female spayed. And so we have been working on that for 30 months, and we have just 4 females left to spay.
Wow.
And I feel very, very proud of that because it felt like an insurmountable task when we started.
Mm-hmm.
And now to be able to see the finish line and to see these lady pigs out there living their best life without any risk of reproductive problems, it's really, really gratifying. So you're catching me today in a good spot where I'm like, there's just 4 left. We're doing great. We're doing it.
You're almost there. You got four
Almost
more.
there. Almost there.
Now, what are some of the challenges that you had moving the sanctuary across the country?
Whew. Well, the first challenge was that overnight our budget went through the roof, right? You mentioned money, like these things cost money. We were running a really small sanctuary in Washington. We were only 3.8 acres. We had 38 pigs in Washington, and we had other animals. We had chickens, we had a few goats, we had a few sheep, we had 2 steers, but our expenses were really manageable, and to go overnight from 4 acres and 50 animal residents to overnight you have 159 pigs that you're responsible for in another state. The biggest thing that was difficult was just trying to wrap our brain around how much money this was going to cost, and sort of adjusting our fundraising outcry to people based on that need. And so that was a really difficult thing to tackle in the first 6 months to a year. Just changing the scale of the operation. That was really hard. The other thing that was really difficult was figuring out the logistics of moving the animals. And people to this day still contact me to ask for advice about that specific subject when they're moving animals. And what we thought initially was that we would be able to hire people to help us move animals. And that does work in some scenarios, but realize we also were working on a pretty tight budget. We couldn't just like rent giant 18 wheelers and move pigs 2,700 miles across the country. And pigs live in different family groups. They couldn't all be piled together. It was very important to us that the animals traveled as comfortably as possible, as quickly as possible, with as little stress to their routine. And that hence the reason we did 11 trips ourselves, because we made sure they traveled as comfortably as they could with caregivers that knew them well. And so the transport was difficult, not only in terms of how many times we did it, but also finding people to help us buddy drive across the country. So, truck drivers sometimes, like when a husband and wife, they travel together in an 18 wheeler, and they can get places faster because, you sleep while I drive and then I sleep while you drive.
Sure.
So that is how we did the transport, is as everybody was buddy driven across the country, so that we didn't have to stop. We didn't have to unload the trailer. The fastest trip we made, I think, was 22 hours.
Wow.
So 2,700 miles, 22 hours, and
unloaded
them at their...
Was Josh driving that one?
Josh drove almost all of them, believe it or not. He was a powerhouse when it came to the move. He was very methodical, very organized. He can tell you still to this day. I mean, it's almost Rain Man-esque. He can tell you where the Starbucks is at what exit along the entire route from Fentress County, Tennessee to Washougal, Washington.
Oh, that's great.
So that was pretty challenging. And then the other thing that was really challenging for us was realizing the volume of need that the animals had here in Tennessee. They needed hooves done, they needed tusks done, some of them needed to be fairly emergently euthanized. Some of them were in very bad condition. We also had all of the spays that I mentioned, but we realized the spays would be a long-term project that just can't be done overnight. But figuring out the transport of those animals, the health care of those animals, while also trying to move a sanctuary from one part of the country to another was really challenging. Like, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. It was really, really hard. And we're grateful that we had so many people to help us with the nuts and bolts on the ground where we were in our respective locations. I was in charge of Washington, Josh was in charge of Tennessee. But also, I wouldn't even dare to do this sort of a project with a partner other than Josh. He was an amazing work partner for this.
Now, when you showed up at the new location in Tennessee, how were the barns?
Oh, that's a good question. There was shelter here for the animals, and some of those shelters are still standing.
Hmm.
But many of them, they're like run-in sheds that you would put, that a horse would live in, or a group of goats.
Hmm.
And the pigs like it that way. They like the open air part of it. They like the fact that it's like a gravel floor underneath. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be cleaned and taken care of and power washed, and those things had not been done in many, many years.
Mm.
And so there were approximately 12 barns on the property, 12 sheds on the property, that all needed a full makeover. And in some cases, they needed to be fully taken down. They needed to be destroyed and removed. Like, the building was no longer even serviceable or safe for the animals
Mm.
to seek shelter there. And so it's still, to this day, it is this balance of, we've added new shelters, we've added new barns, we've refurbished some of the old barns, but then some of them are in such bad condition we've had to remove them. So there's this balance in our budget, not only our monetary budget, but our manpower budget,
Hmm.
of what things need our attention immediately and absolutely have to be fixed, compared to things that I'm like, I still say it to this day when people tour. I know that building is kind of unsightly, but the pigs love it, and it's a dry shelter and it works for them. So, yes, I want the aesthetics of the property to be an accurate representation of the amount of work that we're putting in.
Mm.
But also, I think that most people who make the trek all the way here to Tennessee to visit us, they already know who we are. They
Hmm.
know what our values are. They know what we stand for. And they watch us online showing every step of the process as we refurbish this place. So it is probably a 5-year project for us to have this place in perfect working order, so that the aesthetics do match the amount of work we're putting in. And that is a little bit, that's challenging, right? I want it to happen overnight, but that's
Mm.
just not realistic.
Take us back to the day where you guys made the decision. What was going on in
Oh.
your head? Like, you're sitting there with Josh, whatever, and you get this, I don't know what, an offer to, I don't know. Tell me what happened.
Well, it wasn't quite like that. It was a situation where we knew that the organization here needed help. We knew that the animals needed help. And that doesn't just happen overnight, right? There's a whole, like, we had to do a whole, like, legal sale of the property and legal surrender of the animals in order to take over. And so the process was really between about October of 2020 and April of 2021. And it involved a lot of different, negotiations and lawyers, and, trying to figure out the logistics of how to do it in a way that was legitimate and safe, and made a very clear line of who is responsible for what.
Mm.
Which, I'm a military veteran, so the chain of command and understanding who is in charge is just part of who I am.
Hmm.
So having things lined up in an appropriate order, so that tomorrow, if you decide that you're going to take over this place, you can see clearly what the chain of custody is of everything that happens here. And so we did. We took our time. We made sure we went through the proper legal channels, we have a board of directors as well. We had lots of discussions with the board of directors. It's not just myself and Josh. And we voted. And when we voted, yes, we're going to go through with it. This is what we're going to do. There was a moment where you say, like, how did we feel, or what was the conversation? There was like a, oh goodness, what have we done sort of feeling, right? I mean, you're like accepting custody of the hot potato. And once you have the hot potato, nobody else wants the hot potato. and you realize how hot that potato is. It is hot. And so yes, there was a moment of like, oh dear, we may have bitten off more than we can chew. I think anybody would have felt that way. I don't feel any shame in saying that. I think it's authentic. That's really how we felt. What did we do? Have we made a mistake? Can we pull this off? And then all I really had to do was remind myself, we're here for the animals. This is a job. This is a labor of love. We are choosing to put our lives in this situation where we are going to work very long hours for a very long period of time, but to look at the animals and realize nobody else is coming. There's nobody else who's going to take up this torch and do this with us. We have to set the example, and we have to just put our heads down and do the work. And thankfully that's like my love language. So I was comfortable with that. And I mean, Josh too, he has had, I mean, he could speak for himself, right? But it has been very difficult, but we have just really put our heads down and worked hard and pressed forward because there's no other way through it. We have to do it.
I think that's the way everybody thinks, right? When you have a big project or you get something that's out of your comfort zone, all of a sudden you're like, oh, can I actually do this? And usually if you just, like you said, keep your head down and just keep going, then yeah, you can.
I say that to people who occasionally I get contacted by folks who, they're having, like, whether it's a social media problem or an interpersonal relationship problem in the sanctuary world, which happens, or they're struggling with a donor, feedback that they've received. I get a variety of different calls like that. And I try to always, offer some guidance where I can without, I'm not an expert, but I can share my experience. I try to really encourage people over and over, no matter the scenario, focus on your mission. What is your mission, right? Is this a distraction from your mission? Which, I mean, that goes back to my military roots as well. I think that for us, focusing on the mission of the organization, focusing on the needs of the animals, focusing specifically on animal rights, animal welfare, animal advocacy, helping those who are vulnerable in our world. If we focus on those things, the other stuff just just by default, it kind of goes away because there's not enough time at the end of the day to worry about, well, so-and-so was mean to me and so-and-so doesn't like what I do. That's okay. They can move on, right? The world is a big place. And if they're not in approval of what you're doing, that's okay. But what is your mission? Just focus on your mission.
Right. Now, what does the future hold for Odd Man Inn? I know you guys have just taken on a giant property and you have this whole thing going on, but I'm just curious. Is there anything else you got in the hopper?
Fred, I just want to survive. Well, I think, it's a good question. I make jokes, but it is a good question. And I think it's a question that I wish more people asked of nonprofits and of animal sanctuaries. There has, for us, we have a pretty strong focus on succession planning and on making sure that the organization is well set up for the next generation to take over from us. I've talked pretty openly about this online, just about how Josh and I have started letting go of the reins in some areas to make sure other people are taking responsibility and learning the nuts and bolts of running the organization from behind. It cannot not on this scale. It cannot just be the two of us running an organization. And so Josh and I both stepped down off of the board of directors of Odd Man Inn, and we have a board of directors that we answer to, which I hate to harp on the military thing, but when we're talking about chain of command, that is an important part of making sure there is integrity in the entire chain, that somebody is always answering to somebody else. And so the board of directors supervises us. They're a working board of directors. They all have responsibilities inside of the organization that I train them. Josh trains them. We consult with them. We're available to them. But that is an important part of the next phase of Odd Man Inn, is making sure that our succession planning is in place, and that we don't have a situation where if I vaporize tomorrow, nobody knows how to do the financial audit next year.
Right.
Nobody knows how to do the bookkeeping. Nobody knows how to do our filings with the Secretary of State. Those are not very sexy things that most people don't want to hear about on social media, but they are really important things for longevity of your organization. So that's kind of where we are. We're working on succession planning. We are also working on the house that we are currently in on this facility is no longer serviceable. It is in really, really rough condition. We received it in very rough condition. And the plan long term is to convert this property from what was a single family dwelling to more of a sanctuary that has a welcome center and has a visitors area, has a little gift shop, and has an actual medical barnyard with an animal caregiver headquarters. And the phase that we're in now of growth is that we are pushing through with the first phase of getting ourselves out of this single family dwelling that we've been using as animal caregiver headquarters. It's a lot to manage. That part of things is difficult. I mean, it's again, not very sexy stuff, talking to engineers and talking to builders and, the septic people. And it's just very unsexy, but it's an important part of succession planning when we think, okay, the next person who takes over from us, they don't want to inherit a disaster. They want to inherit something that is dialed in, that is well thought out, that has a plan for the future. And the more diligent we are about putting that plan into place, the more likely we are to actually attract really good young talent into the organization.
I think that is so important to kind of, I guess, future proof your animal sanctuary, to think about, okay, at some point, God forbid, something's going to happen and the animals are still going to be there. And the last thing you're going to want is something to happen to them. So for people to understand that there is a future and that you do have to create a line of succession, I feel is just so important.
I think so too. And I think that it would be very easy. I mean, I'm a Pisces and I'm an empath by nature. So it would be very easy for me to be like, well, all of these animals are my children and I love them so much, right? I love them just as much as I loved all of my little stuffed animals on my bed when I was 6-year-old little Wendy. But I have to remember, I am responsible for them, even if I am responsible for them and I am not their mother. I am their caregiver. And the thing that they need from us, from all of us, is to be good stewards of the organization that helps them live their best lives. And so I really try to focus on that. I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm sitting in my office and I'm like surrounded by like blueprints and bookkeeping and animal transport protocols that we're working on. And it's not very warm and fuzzy. It's very utilitarian, but that is what the animals need from me, from all of us, as we are stewards of their organization. And I do think I hear some organizations talking openly about that, but realize like the world of social media has a tendency to want to showcase, like, okay, here's another cute pig, here's another cute cow, because those are the things that get likes and follows and shares, and everybody's hoping that a video is going to go viral or somebody's going to do a feature on them, and they're certainly not going to do any feature about the bookkeeping practices of Odd Man Inn. Nope. but we put as much energy we put as much energy into the logistics of the business as we do into the care of the animals.
What is the most rewarding part of what you do?
Oh, the most rewarding part, personally, the most rewarding part is anything that has to do with hands-on time with the animals. It's my favorite. I just this morning we have a pig chute, a medical chute, where we can walk the pigs in and we can lift them up in the air and we can trim their hooves and trim their tusks, and I mean, it is a beautiful thing. It's a very expensive piece of equipment that donors purchased for us last year, and we use that sucker, man, 3 times a week sometimes. I mean, it's a very valuable piece of equipment. And so just this morning, we had this 12-year-old Hampshire pig. His name is Bobby. He has really bad feet. He has like gnarly old man feet from years of hoof neglect, like just like you and I, right? If you don't trim your toenails for 10 years, you're going to have some problems. And I mean, in some situations, if their arthritis and their feet are bad enough, it can create a euthanasia situation if you can't get that under control. If they can't walk, they can't live. He's too big. He's 900 plus pounds.
Wow.
And so just this morning, we had Bobby up in the medical chute, and I was literally under him as though you would be under a car. And I'm trimming his feet and using power tools and getting him all tuned up for the winter. And to me, that is, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love sitting here doing a podcast with you, but the highlight of my day today was Bobby. And that, I mean, that's on a personal level, but on a bigger scale, the things that make me happiest are when I see people out randomly in the world who I may never meet ever. They know our animals' names and they have connected with those animals. And they're asking, like just today, I had someone asking for an update on one of our animals because I hadn't mentioned her in a while. Being able to run an organization that's able to create those connections all across the world, that to me, that is the surest recipe for helping people examine their own food choices in their everyday life. If they connect with Bobby and with Bobby's story and the fact that we're helping this giant old pig with his gnarly old man feet, my hope is that they then, when they're offered some sort of bacon product, they will realize Bobby is the same as bacon, and they will choose differently. And so those connections are really, really important to me.
What did you learn from this whole endeavor?
Oh, I learned a lot of things. I think I learned the most important thing I learned is that there are limits to what a few humans can do, and we have pushed ourselves to the brink over the last 2.5 years. To the brink in terms of whether it's finances or emotions or sheer workload. There is a limit there. And I've always been the kind of person who is like, well, if I work harder, we'll get it done. Okay, well, it's still not done. Well, I'll just work a little harder. Well, I'll just work a little harder. And I have had a little bit of like, I've eaten a little bit of humble pie and been like, okay, there are nights where I am so tired, where Josh is so tired that I realize like it's okay sometimes to say, I'm at my limit. I can't answer another email. I can't take another animal. I can't do you this favor. It's not because I don't want to. It's because I physically have limitations. And I think that understanding those limitations is a little bit of maturity, right? You kind of grow into that
Mm-hmm.
when you push yourself past the brink. And and I don't feel sad about realizing that. I feel relieved that I've finally learned that lesson.
As far as projects that are happening right now with the animal refuge, what is on the list right now?
Whew, what's not? so so I already mentioned to you that we have 4 more spays. So that's pretty high on the priority list, is to get those ladies what they need and finish that project. We also we over the course of this entire year, we've been building pig awnings on the front of their houses to expand their outdoor space, but also to give them some extra shelter in the winter and in the rain.
Mm-hmm.
That project is complete. I'm proud to say we built 13 pig awnings this over the course of the summer.
Wow.
The next big project that we are working on towards the end of the year here is we're trying to get ourselves out of this house that is on the property. And what that means is we have to find other avenues to do things that need to be done indoors on other places in the property. And so we have just started with the first phase of getting ourselves out. We call it the sketchy house, right? The sketchy house and the sketchy kitchen. So it's phase 1 of get Odd Man In out of the sketchy house. And I really did think that we'd be out of the sketchy house the moment we arrived here on the property. It was in that bad of condition.
Mm.
And we've been tolerating working in this space for over 2 years now. And now that we finally, the priority needed to be the animals. We have the animals in a situation where their shelter is taken care of, everyone is comfortable, their vet care is taken care of, the spays are almost finished. We can finally focus on something that is more for the longevity of the organization and the comfort and safety of the animal caregivers. And so that's the next big project, is phase 1 of get Odd Man In out of the sketchy house.
Sketchy house. It sounds like a Halloween thing.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody goes to Halloween as the sketchy kitchen from Odd Man In.
How has your life changed over the last couple of years?
Gosh. I think that it was a pretty big change for us to go from what's essentially vegan Mecca up in the Pacific Northwest
Mm-hmm.
to living in rural Tennessee, where there are very, very few vegan options of anything, whether it's vegan groceries at the grocery store. There's certainly not a vegan grocery store here, whereas in Portland you can find multiple stores that just focus on vegan options. We don't have vegan restaurants here in Jamestown, in this little town that we live in. So that from a personal standpoint, that was difficult in the first year that we were here. Just sort of the grief of realizing we are now in a part of the country and in a part of the state that does not really, that's just about 40 or 50 years behind the times. They just don't, it's just not part of the normal conversation to talk about being vegan or to even ask for vegan options. People just don't even understand what you're talking about.
Right.
So our life has definitely changed in terms of, recreation or, any sort of, fun date night, go out to eat sort of thing. Like I said at the beginning when we first started talking, Josh and I have a date this afternoon to go pick up a truckload of donated tomatoes. And if I'm lucky, we might pass a Starbucks and I can get a vegan oat milk mocha. So you have to, we've had we went through this grief process initially where we're like, okay, it's definitely a different culture here. And the closest big city to us is almost 2 hours away. So that's pretty challenging. In terms of, workload and the animals, yes, it's been more difficult just because of the volume, but our life is about the same sanctuary wise. We have all the same standards that we have had for the whole 8 years that Odd Man Inn has been in existence. We just had to turn the volume up essentially, right? Because of
Mm-hmm.
so many animals. But that is all just about the same. And the other thing that I think has changed for us that has been a transition is trying to sort of slowly build in some more work life balance for myself and Josh, which I do think is it's part of succession planning in that it's making sure that your caregivers have enough longevity in them to continue being of service to the organization. We don't believe in running our animal caregivers into the ground with super long work hours and unfair work conditions. So why would we do that to ourselves? It's
Mm-hmm.
just not realistic. And I think that I sort of started down this unhealthy track of, you have to be a martyr for the organization. We have to give absolutely everything, every square inch of space, every minute of time. And that's just not sustainable for years and years and years. And I would like to be of service to the organization for a very long time to come, which means we have had to build in some time and some priorities for ourselves, and that has been difficult. It's like having a child that's going off to college,
Mm.
and you don't really want to release them. You want them to stay under your wing, but also you realize it's in their best interest for you to release them. And so Josh and I do not live on the property. Odd Man Inn owns her own property. She is her own entity. And Josh and I have our own property separate from Odd Man Inn. Now, granted, we just live at the end of the driveway. We bought a piece of property at the end of the Odd Man Inn driveway. But we have really worked hard to build in that work-life balance of this is completely segregated from Odd Man Inn. It's okay for us to we've given ourselves permission to have some time that is just for us and some space that's just for us.
That's great. Yeah, you really need to separate. I can imagine it must be extremely hard, but to separate yourself from the organization is something that you need just for your own well-being.
Yeah, it and that was really hard to accept, which, as I'm sure any mother feels when she is like, maybe left out of things that her child is doing because her child is independent, and but that's what you want, right? You want to
Mm.
raise children that are, productive members of society who can function on their own. And that is sort of the mindset that we've had with Odd Man Inn really from the start, is that we want to grow this organization into someone that will far exceed our expectations and grow into the next generation where we, as people in our hope, if we make it to our 70s, our 80s, our 90s, we can look back fondly and say, we were there back when, right? Back in the day when we lived in the sketchy house, back in the day when we were like washing dishes with the hose in the driveway, and sort of enjoy the fact that she has grown into her own. But that does mean we have to be brave enough, not only brave enough, but confident enough in the people we have put in place to let them take the reins on some things. And that has been, it's been really difficult, but honestly, this is like therapy. I feel like talking about it makes it a little bit easier, and just being honest with people about it. And the feedback that we have received from longtime followers and donors is that they are so relieved to see that we are not running ourselves into the ground, that we are looking at how can we make sure we are also taking care of ourselves so that we can continue being of service to the organization.
Okay, so I have one kind of last question here. How do you deal with Josh's music?
Oh, Fred, I'm going to have to
Those
tell
are
Josh,
fighting words.
I know. I'll have to say, listen to the first part of the podcast, but don't listen to the last 5 minutes. Well, when Josh and I met, he's always been a hardcore music fanatic. His taste is all over the map. And strangely enough, I am not a music person. I'm just not. I would prefer to sit in silence. I would prefer to work in silence. I don't listen to music all the time. In fact, I listen to music very rarely. And so when we met and I realized what a music fan he was, I was like, I was just really clear with him. I can't go there with you. I'm just not into that.
I got to be honest. I can't go there.
I can't go there. I can't do that. Josh is actually really respectful in our home. He does not like play music all the time, but if I ever get in the car behind him, he leaves that sucker on blast. It is on full blast with something really terrible. And if it's Phil Collins, I'm like, I got to get out of the car right now. I can't do Phil Collins.
Oh,
you're a funny man, Fred Ferris. Funny man.
Such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
What is the best way for people to follow you, support Odd Man In on Instagram, Patreon, the web, anywhere?
I recently started saying to people, like, if you can support in any way that makes sense for you, we are grateful. If it's $1 a month on Patreon, that's great. We're thrilled to have that, and we're thrilled to have you on board. If someone is interested in our medical stuff, we talk pretty extensively about our medical care of the animals on Patreon. And that's just patreon.com/oddmanin. If someone wants to follow us on social media, then we're really easy to find. Everything is at Odd Man In. It's 2 N's like a hotel. And if you're looking for gifts for your loved ones, we have a really beautiful, environmentally friendly store on our website. And that's just www.oddmanin.org. And we put a lot of energy into making sure we put stuff in there that is like attractive to a wide variety of people. So that's another way to support.
Thanks again, Wendy, for being on Plant Your Seed, and make sure you say hi to Josh.
I will. Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to connect with your listeners.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.